Hi, it's Chris from Quirky Neighbor, and today I'm going to walk you through the mechanics of how I create a mug design using Photoshop. There's a lot of other design tools out there, Canva, Affinity Designer, Affinity Photo. You can use Procreate on your iPad, which I have also done, but I'm going to show you Photoshop. But the concepts will be the same really from tool to tool. So when you're getting started on any design that you're going to use for print on demand, the first thing you're going to have to know is how big does this image need to be? Because they're going to have minimum size and minimum dots per inch requirements that you need to meet for an appropriate quality on the print job. So you're going to go first to the print on demand supplier you're going to use and go to the product page. This is where I usually start, and just see what resources they have. Some of them will actually provide templates for you. They could be a Photoshop file or a PDF or like a PNG image that you can import into whatever your graphic editing software is. Some suppliers will just give you measurements, and that also works fine because you're going to be able to start really with any graphic editing software. Just say, this is how big I need the image to be. And since we're talking about 11-ounce mugs, these are not very large files, so you shouldn't really have any problems maxing out the capabilities of your graphic tool. And that's another important thing to know and check with the print on demand supplier is what kind of file do you need to provide to them. So and usually it's going to be a PNG or a JPEG. PNG is what I use most of the time for mugs, because I want in most of my designs, I want the mug to show through where I haven't specifically put words or an image. But you could also use a JPEG, particularly if you're using a solid color for the entire background. And we're just talking about an 11-ounce mug here, which is a pretty standard size. So the odds are the mugs themselves, the physical objects, are pretty much the same from a print on demand supplier to supplier, but they might use different equipment, and that has different capabilities for how much of the surface they can print on. So that's why it's important to start with your print on demand supplier to see what their specific requirements are. And you will find they're very close in size, but always double check. So when you get started to do your design, you're going to start with you need to set up in your graphic file, in your graphic tool, your design tool, whatever it is that you're using. You need to set up an image file to meet the design requirements. If you have a template of some sort to start with, you can just bring that into your graphic design program and use that as a starting point. And most of them you're going to be able to use layers. So and you'll see I put my template sort of on the background layer, and then I hide it when I'm done. If all you're getting from your supplier is the measurements, then you're going to create a new file using those measurements. And it's always good to save it off as a template if you think you're going to use that supplier again for the same product. So those are your basics of just starting out, getting your graphic file set up to the right size. So then the basic steps. Now, I'm not going to talk about the creative process of how you come up with a design idea. I'm really not a person to teach you about that. That I'm still learning that process myself. But create your design. So one of the things you need to decide is, of course, a mug is a three-dimensional object. You need to decide, do you want that design to be the same on both sides of the mug? Do you want to have a design only on one side? Or do you want to have something different on each side and take advantage of the fact that it is a three-dimensional object that you can wrap a design around? And I've done all of those things. When you're working with your file, you're going to want to pay attention to your layers. But I'll talk about that when I'm actually into Photoshop. But that'll help control things like how readable is your text. You got to think about that. And one tip that I'll show you is, and this is especially useful if you're doing using a mug that's a color other than white. It's useful to put a layer in your file that's the color of the mug. And that way you can kind of turn it on and off just to give yourself a little preview of what the design is going to look like. Because if you're using a black mug, a design is going to look very different on that than if you're using a white mug, just because of the color contrast. Okay. And once you're done with your design, one important thing is to hide any layers you don't want printed. And that'll include a template file if you have one, if you're starting with like a template image, and the background if you don't want that to be printed. Then of course you want to save it, and then you're going to export generally in a PNG or JPEG format. And that's what that is the file that you're actually going to send to your print-on-demand supplier. Okay, so let me get into Photoshop and we'll get started. Okay, so here I am in Photoshop, and what we're looking at is the template file from Printful. And this is just their simple Photoshop template file for the 11-ounce mug. Now, this one, as I said, is in native Photoshop format. They also provide a PDF, which you could bring into like a vector design program. And they also provide a PNG, which is the exact same image that you see here, that you could bring into, say, Canva. And I could have alternatively brought that image into Photoshop and started with that one. Now, just to give you an idea of what some of the other templates look like that I've found from other providers, here is an image file that Custom Cat provides for their own 11-ounce mug. Now they happen to, it's very similar in that like they give these centering lines for, so like this center line right in the very middle, that is on the side that is opposite the handle. And then the other two vertical lines are for the center of when you have the handle to either side. It's what's the center that you're looking at. And you might notice that the Printful version has pretty much the exact same thing. Custom Cat gives you a little bit more details about some of the borders, and some of that information applies more to designs where you're trying to fill the entire space and you're not leaving the mug to show through, but just as an FYI. Now, just to, as an additional little tool, Printful does provide what they call a half template. So you see, this is 9 inches in width. This will go around the whole mug. And actually, let's just take a look at the size. So the image size, 2700 by 1050 pixels. Now, they also happen to provide what they call this half template. It doesn't have as much information, but it gives you the size. So this is 1350, which of course is half of 2700 by 1050. So if you decide that you want to just have the exact same design on both sides, you don't want to bother with having to duplicate it and recenter it on the opposite side, Printful, I do know, and I haven't checked on other vendors to see if they have the same option. Printful does have an option where you can upload this half-size image, and then there's a box that you check when you're doing a mug that says repeat on the other side. So their system will do the work for you, duplicating. But I don't know that other vendors have the same thing, because all of their measurements that they provide or their templates are this full wraparound. So, okay. And of course, as we just talked about, some vendors do not give you a template, they give you measurements. So if you have that scenario, say you're going to design an 11-ounce mug to put up using Gutenberg, we're going to go and we're going to create a new file, and I'm going to use their dimensions, and I happen to have already done this, but the size they give is 2538 pixels, which you see here is the width, and the height of 945, 300 DPI, that's per inch. And the RGB color mode is perfectly fine. That's what you need to use for these. And you would just hit create, and it's going to create your file. And this type of functionality is something you're going to find really in any graphics program, where you tell the software, I need an image in this size. Okay, but we're going to start with the Printful one, which I happen to like because it comes already with layers and it comes with a nice little white background, which I'll talk about in a moment. And I like the guide. It has a lot of reference points with the glasses and everything that you can see here that makes it a little easier to get all the pieces lined up if you have a complex design. Okay, so just talk about some of the concepts here of layering. It's kind of like sheets of clear plastic stacked. And you got to figure out what you want to see in what order on those stacked sheets of plastic. And visually it's pretty easy here in Photoshop because it just goes top down, and that's how your layers are stacked conceptually and digitally. And you can turn them on and off. And this is something you'll be able to do. I know in other software, I've seen it in the capability in Canva. Obviously, the Affinity products can do it. Procreate certainly can. And now this other section here that has this rectangle that's white, I'll turn that off and you see what happens. And what we're seeing is this checkerboard thing, which means we have a transparent background now. Now, I talked a moment ago about a little hint for setting up a background layer with the color of your mug. And I find it very helpful for previewing, especially if I'm not going to use a white mug. I have a few designs that I put on a black mug, and those can be a little trickier to design for. So let's just change this to black. And so you can see all of a sudden it makes it much more clear, like what you need to do with your text. Like you're not going to put black text on a black background unless you have some other layer on top of it. So like, here you can see the, you get the idea that you just don't, it can be helpful. Okay. Well, let's just walk through a really simple design. I'm going to put a graphic and some text on here. So I already have a graphic I'm going to use as something I've licensed. We're just going to make a simple Christmas mug. So I've copied that. I'll paste it in. You have to resize it. This is a nice big scan someone did of some vintage artwork. And now this is where you're going to start playing around, seeing what fits, what you like aesthetically. I tend to like diagonal lines. Some people like very straight square lines. It's whatever aesthetic works for you. Okay, so I'll just put that there. And now I'm going to put some text. And you can see I left my text at white. So we can't really see it, which is a good example. So I'm on my text layer. You can just see it over here. It might be a little small. Let's change that to black. Okay. Now, just make sure it's centered. It looks right. Now, now you'll see I tend to go back and forth turning this background image on and off as I go back and forth to like trying to get it lined up where I want. So let's just turn off the guide. Okay, does it look right? Yeah. Okay, that's not bad. I sometimes play around with aligning the text. Do I want it, especially since I have an asymmetrical image here. Oh, it's a lot of it's playing around. So now this is where you have to decide, do I want to do, like for the rest of it, do I want to leave the other side blank? Because in this case, because I have the image here on the right hand side, you would only see this if you only, as the, if you're drinking out of this cup, you're only going to see it if you're holding the mug with the handle in your right hand. There wouldn't be anything on the other side. We could put the same thing on the other side, or we could put something completely different, or we could we could have a design that goes all the way across. It's like a continuous scene, which I have done on some. But I think in this case, I'm simply going to copy. I'm going to basically have the same text on the other side. I will have the same image, but I'm going to flip it because I want to have it appear in the upper left-hand corner. So let's just duplicate my layer here. grab it, move it across, use the line to make sure it's about the same spot. Okay. Now, oops, and I just realized, sorry, I like to have my, this is just a personal thing. I like to have my design above the guide. Oh, okay. Now we're also going to duplicate the image layer. Move that over a bit. Just get it over out of the way. Transform. I'm going to flip it horizontally. And now we will make sure we get it. Now this is where the like having these extra reference points is useful. So like I'm going to take this middle bell over here on the right hand side. I can see where it's lined up with the glasses and the line. So I'm going to use that as a reference point. Okay, that looks pretty good. Maybe a little yeah. Okay. You can also do things like, you can look on your properties to make sure, over here I could make sure that like they're the same height. 830, yeah. Okay. So that was a real simple design. I've done stuff that's a lot more elaborate, but that was a real quick and easy one to do. Oops. And now let's just make sure we save it. Okay. Okay. But of course, this is not what we want to send. This is not what we want to send to the vendor. If we exported this as a PNG, you'd have the whole mess here printing on your mug. So what do we want to do? We need to turn off the guide. That's obvious. Now, and I made this mistake when I was first starting to do this. It looks like you're good, but you have this white background. If you leave this white background, which is this white rectangle layer here, there's you're going to wind up with pixels in the image, and it's going to, and you could wind up with, they could actually try and print white on the white mug. Not all vendors will do that. Some of them will try, but like if you export this as it is now, there's a risk you could wind up with like a weird texture on your mug because they actually try to put down white ink. So in this case, I do not want to have anything printed on the mug where I don't specifically have the image or the text. There could be cases, however, where you want to print a specific color background on your mug or all the way around. So let's just say, I want to do, let's just do this, a pale green. Come on. This green, medium green here. If you wanted that, if that's the look you wanted, in that case, you would leave this rectangle on because you want the green to show and to print. In this case, I do not. So let's actually, I will turn it back. Let's do a little undo. But I'm going to hide that white because what I want is the checkerboard. It's because I want to be able to save this as a transparent PNG so that it limits how much gets put down on the mug. You get a better texture on the mug, get better results. And this is just, unless you specifically want to print a color all the way around. This is the way you generally want to set up your mug images. So let's save this again. Now I need to export it. And obviously, whatever software you're using, you're going to look and see how you need to export it. I always export mine. I'm going to export this as a PNG because I want that transparent background. If you wanted the filled in background, you could do it either as PNG or as JPEG. So I have my PNG saved. And that is what I'm actually going to wind up send to the print on demand vendor. And that's how it would print on the mugs. So I hope this was helpful. It was a pretty basic walkthrough, and I actually found mugs to be a really good entry point if you're trying to learn how to design for print on demand, because they're very forgiving as a product. Things like t-shirts, a lot of people try t-shirts, and because you're printing on fabric, they can be a little tougher to design well for. Mugs are a little easier because it's, especially if you start with a plain white mug, It's very forgiving with the colors, very forgiving with the images, and the images are small. So, it's not as challenging, I think, to start with, but I hope it was helpful. I'm hoping to do some other tips and tricks with other product categories, some of which are a little more challenging, and hope you have a great day. Bye.